Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink, Thursday, September 4th. Greg Waddell, Sleepers Media, this week's guest on Podcast on the Brink, returning guest. Before we get to Greg, if you enjoy the show, please leave us a 5-star rating over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're watching over on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow our reach. As Greg knows, he's a prominent, I think I can call you that, college basketball YouTuber at this point. Greg, one of the reasons I love to have you on, you and Carter, what you do year round in terms of content, how much you guys grind, and the fact that you just don't take it so seriously. I feel like sometimes, I take it so seriously, and I like to watch you guys because you have fun with everything. You do a lot of different things throughout the off season to kind of keep the content fresh. So I really enjoy it. Thanks for taking the time to come on, and thanks for being a good sport. I kind of put you on the spot when we got on this call, and I wanted you to go through an exercise with me here, and you came up with your list in like 5 minutes. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
Absolutely, man. Likewise, I'm a huge fan of everything you guys are doing with Inside the Hall. We know you guys are the go-tos for Indiana, so it's great to be back. Great to see you again, and you know your personnel here because there's nothing I love more than being put on the spot and coming up with lists and having fun talking Big Ten hoops. Let's do it.
So we got about 2 months until the regular season starts, and what I enlisted Greg with the challenge of doing is giving each Big Ten team a spot on a tier list. So I broke it up into 5 tiers, just kind of going from top to bottom. Big Ten national contender, I kind of defined that as a team that could win the Big Ten title, go on a deep tournament run, solid NCAA tournament teams that we expect to get in, but maybe not, maybe win a game, maybe get to the second weekend, but flame out. Then we have could be in bubble teams, which are, teams that have a chance to make it, but could also be on the bubble, not totally sure where they're going to end up. The 4th tier is kind of see you in the crown. A little bit of a joke there because of that tournament and everything that went on with that last year. And then no shot at the postseason, which, there's certainly some teams in the league that probably fit into that category. So, Greg, I want to start with that and work our way up. Teams that you kind of look at in the preseason here as we get ready for another season of Big Ten hoops and say no shot at the postseason. Who are those 4? Or I don't want to say 4. I don't know that there are 4, but who are those teams? And maybe give me a little bit on each team and why you feel that way.
Sure. So I only have 2 teams in this tier, and as we work our way up the list, I think a couple things are going to become abundantly true about how I feel about this league right now. But I want to give a little hat tip to your colleague Dylan Burkhart from Hoops, as you guys are working through the Big Ten players countdown, which is one of my favorite features every offseason. He has made the point repeatedly that there's only, I think, maybe 2 teams in this entire league that would consider changing coaches right now. And I think that's very real. In an 18-team league, there are 16 teams that either feel very good about a new hire they just made or the trajectory of the coach they hired a couple years ago, or have coaches in their prime that are still winning at a high level. So to me, the only 2 that you can put definitively in the there's no postseason future here are the 2 that may be looking elsewhere in a year or so. It's Penn State and it's Rutgers. And, 2 years ago, I would have never thought that we would see Steve Peichel on the hot seat, but it was quite a risk for him to bring in those 5 stars and build everything around 2 players who so clearly had their feet out the door coming into the season. And he did a horrible job surrounding them with the things they needed in what could have been a very special year. He's reset the book here. This Rutgers team is really bare on paper. There's not a lot to like from what they bring back. And I guess you could argue after a miserable season, it's good to kind of start fresh. But I just think the juice has run out for Peichel. With Penn State, they have some talent. Don't get me wrong. Mingo is a guy that a lot of people like. And I think it's hard to see how little they've been able to build momentum since Shrewsbury had the Jalen Pickett year. I mean, there have been good players. Ace Baldwin is a great player, and Mike Rose just couldn't figure out how to win in this league. I'm not expecting much. So, yeah, I'm going to keep this tier to 2 as the hopeless teams coming into the season.
Do you actually think that Rhodes or Peichel are actually on the hot seat going into the season? I mean, Rhodes is this is going to be year three, and Peichel is obviously, I think, built up some at least credibility there in terms of what he's been able. I mean, Rutgers before he got there was an absolute joke of a program. He's made some NCAA tournaments, but you mentioned last season there was a ton of high hopes. I'm just curious if you think there's a realistic chance that either of those programs would move on after this season.
I think there really is, and with Peichel, that really bums me out because everybody loves Steve Peichel. He's a great guy, but yeah, I think just from a general pulse and kind of what are you guys hearing, asking around, it feels like there is a real sense of last season went as bad as it could have. It's never going to be better than that in terms of talent at this school, and the wheels have fallen off. With Rhodes, it's still early. But also, once you get through your third year, how early is it? And he's won 16 games both of those years. I don't think anyone's expecting Penn State to win more than 16 games in year three with how loaded this conference is. So we'll see. Those two are both going to have to pleasantly surprise, I think. If either one of those teams ends up like in the bubble conversation, then you're probably talking about some job security. But I just don't expect that to happen. And quite frankly, I'd be surprised if either of these teams made the crown.
Yeah, so moving up to that next category or tier, teams that could kind of make the postseason, the crown, whatever postseason, just not the NCAA tournament, but some type of postseason. How many teams do you have in this tier, and who do you have?
I have three teams in this tier, and two of them I'm very upset with myself that I'm putting in this tier. So I'll do the third first. I have Minnesota in this tier. Now, this is just simply a Nico Medved hat tip. And I'm used the term hat tip twice in 5 minutes now. I got to stop doing that. But a lot of smart people tell me they love Nico Medved. He's an offensive genius and a guy that will get the most out of his rosters at all times. I have pushed back on that from time to time previously. I think, he's had talent at Colorado State that, quite frankly, I think could have been more successful and made some postseason runs. And it's a credit to him and how he built those rosters. But we just watched John Tonji go to Wisconsin and look like the second best player in the league. He certainly didn't look like that in his years at Colorado State before it on teams that had some real superstars with Isaiah Stevens, a point guard people liked. But I think Minnesota, I would argue, is the hardest place to win at in this league. And that sounds crazy when Penn State basketball exists. But, we've seen guys that have proven themselves to be good coaches elsewhere go there and just fail. If you're Nico, there are reasons to believe that he's a better culture fit with that program. And I'm very curious to see what he'll look like in year one. But yeah, roster-wise, what he's put together, I don't expect them to be competitive. If it was a different coach, I would probably bump them down to the Penn State Rutgers tier, but you have to give me Nico the benefit of the doubt. The two I want to lump together here, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, Nebraska and Northwestern. These are two programs with two coaches that have proven they can overachieve in this league. Fred Hoiberg and Chris Collins are two guys that, quite frankly, have dragged NIT at best rosters to the NCAA tournament multiple times in the last 5 years. And Northwestern has a top 6 player in the conference, and Nick Martinelli, who, if all goes well, it's not crazy to think that he would be in the Big Ten Player of the Year conversation at the end of the year. There's some breakout candidates in KJ Wyndham and a few other young pieces on the Northwestern roster that kind of raised the upside. And then Nebraska last year went sideways for them, I think largely because they didn't have Rank Mast, who, remember, the last time they had Rank Mast was incredible, and we don't know what he's going to be post-injury. But I think, these are two guys in Collins and Hoiberg. I want to believe in them on an annual basis, but I do think there is so much talent in this conference from all of these big spender schools elsewhere that for now you need to drop them below the teams that just have a little more star power.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the thing that I mentioned to Dylan when we went through and made the list, I feel like last year, previous years, it got to a certain point where it was hard to come up with names to put on this list. I feel like this year the talent overall in the Big Ten is just so deep, and there was guys I think we left off. And we did that. We've done it in the past. We've made mistakes. Like last year, we didn't have John Tonji on the list in the preseason. I don't think anybody would have, but
Oh.
I just feel like overall the talent in this league, and a lot of that has to do with obviously the NIL and resources that programs are committing to men's basketball, is deep. And I agree. I mean, Nebraska and Northwestern, they're going to have games at home where they knock off, a top 2 or 3 team in the Big Ten. And we're going to say, wow, is this team, you know, potentially NCAA tournament team? I feel like they could play well in the non-conference against. I haven't examined both of their schedules all that closely, but I think they could rack up some wins in the non-conference. But I agree with you. They both have so many question marks with just some key positions and what they lost. I mean, Northwestern losing Jalen Leach and Brooks Barnheiser. We kind of saw what that team looked like later in the season without those guys. It was tough. In Nebraska, I mean, losing Bryce Williams, that's a he was such an important piece for them. So I do feel like those are two teams that by season's end we could say we missed on one of them and they worked their way into the bubble conversation. But I think for a starting point with both of them, that's probably a fair spot for both of them.
And to add, they both went 7-13 in the conference last year. And, I don't think there's a world either one of those teams is like non-competitive. To your point, they're going to win home games and be a tough out any given night. But I think the baseline expectation is almost in that, 6 to 8 wins category for either. I would say this tier we're about to get to, I would bet really good money that at least one, if not two of the teams in the tier we're about to talk about ends up finishing below Nebraska and Northwestern. There's some more volatility in this upcoming tier, but there's also higher upside.
So is this the biggest tier of the 5 for you in terms of number of teams?
By far the biggest tier for me.
How many do you have here?
I have 6 teams in my on the bubble tier.
Okay. And who are those 6?
I have Washington, Indiana, Iowa, Maryland, Ohio State, and USC. Now,
Okay.
if I don't know, if we were being even more creative on this, I like the way you tiered this. You could argue to me that there's a 6th tier that I would just throw Indiana, Iowa, and Maryland into. Basically, brand new hires. We like the rosters. At least one of these guys is going to have like a top 25 good team. And the other two probably should be around the NCAA tournament. But, when I've talked about it this offseason, I really just don't know which ones to trust, quite frankly. I like all 3 on paper. I think Ben McCollum's resume speaks for itself. I think DeVries clearly is a great cultural fit at Indiana, and I was impressed with how they looked overseas. And I think Buzz Williams gets a bad rap. He has such a high floor as a coach. I mean, Maryland probably has the most questions with what they've done from a roster standpoint, but I don't know how you don't look at what he was able to do in the SEC these last 3 or 4 years, always have his teams firmly in the tournament and think that guy could win games at Maryland in the Big Ten in year 1. So, for me, it's easy to just kind of lump them together. I don't think there's any teams in this tier that I feel are can't miss enough that you need to elevate them into the solid NCAA tournament picture. But, the beautiful thing about this league, I would bet 4, if not 5 of these teams end up making the tournament, even if they're sweating a little bit on Selection Sunday. Washington, just to single one out, Washington is the one that I would bet the most on here because I love this roster. I think they are deep. I think they've got serious talent. JJ Mandequit was a kid that looked great in the FIBA World Cup U18 summer training camp stuff. And he may not even have a huge role on this team. Hans Steinbach was arguably the best international player at the entire event. And then you've got guys that they stole from one of the other West Coast teams in Wesley Yates, who should be an obvious breakout candidate. And, I don't love the pairing with Des Claude, just saying, let's run it back in new uniforms. But those are proven guys that it went sideways with Muss, but that was largely because USC had no front court help. Washington has front court help. So if not for how Danny Sprinkle's first year went, and that kind of goes back to my point on how much should we trust the first-year coaches, I think Sprinkle's a good guy with a very bright future. It just didn't come together for him in year 1. And if that year was erased from memory, I would probably put Washington higher on this list. But I think the safe thing to do with all these year 1 and year 2 guys who we just don't know is to lump them all together, admit that 4 of these are going to make the tournament, and it's kind of fish in a barrel on who.
Did you find it curious that Claude and Yates both ended up at the same place after last season?
I did. I'm stunned that they would sign up for that, quite frankly. But I think individually they're both very good players. I think from what I saw from USC last year, neither one of those guys was ever the problem. I mean, they were playing with the worst front court in the league. So in a weird way, the fact that they do want to continue playing together, and I'm sure NIL played a part in it, Danny Sprinkle's spending some good money right now, it makes me optimistic that this could work, because clearly there wasn't any friction issues that will carry over into this year, I think.
So the one team I want to ask you about in that tier that we didn't really expand on, Ohio State. I feel like this is more of an indictment on Jake Diebler than it is the actual talent on the roster, because you look at this roster and you say, I mean, they've got Bruce Thornton, they've got Mobley, they've got Devin Royal, 3 guys that we had in the top 40 of our list, and you think this should be a team that's solidly in the NCAA tournament. And then you look at the fact that they've had Thornton the last 3 years, haven't made the tournament. He's been an all Big Ten type of player, specifically last year. Is this more of a question mark in terms of Diebler's ability to get this team enough wins to get them in the tournament from your standpoint?
100%. So I think this starting 5 is probably top 15 to 20 good in the country. Now, the question for me, beyond just what is Jake Diebler doing, which is a very fair question, is do they have anything depth-wise that will matter? I mean, the only proven player they're going to bring off the bench is Big O, Josh. Oh, I don't know if I'm going to botch the name. John Wuna, I believe, from Baylor. He's been a good bench big his whole career. I mean, a guy that theoretically will give you great secondary center minutes, but to me, they're going to be very top heavy. They're going to need 35 minutes from Bruce Thornton, which he's done before, Devin Royal, which he hasn't done before, and probably Mobley. I don't really buy a Tyson Chapman year 2 breakout after he missed all of last year with injury. He was a prestigious recruit, but it hasn't looked the part yet. And nobody else off the bench is a proven player at the Division I level, let alone the high major Big Ten level. So, it's star heavy. Bruce Thornton is not a guy I personally want to attach myself to. So
same.
If we could swap them coaches with somebody else in this league, they're probably up 1 tier solidly in the tournament. But let's be honest, it's not going to surprise either of us if this team misses the tournament.
Yeah, Thornton and Mobley are going to have to play 36, 37 minutes, because you look at Gabe Cupps is, I think, the backup point guard, and nothing against Gabe Cupps, but we saw him play as a freshman in Indiana, and he was timid, looked scared to shoot. Who knows? Maybe he's better with a couple of years under his belt, redshirting last year. But the guard depth there scares me. So moving into the next tier, which I believe we have 7 teams left: Illinois, Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio, or Oregon, Purdue, UCLA, Wisconsin. These are solid NCAA tournament teams, but not necessarily teams that you would predict to, let's say, win the Big Ten or go to the Elite Eight. Who is in this tier for you?
I think the hardest part for me of tearing this up was figuring out where to put the group of 7 that is still to come here, how to divvy them up. I think there's an argument you could put Purdue completely in a tier of their own, and there's an argument you could put, I don't know, 5 or 6 of these teams I'm about to name all in the top tier of making a deep run and being contenders to win the league. So the way I ended up going with, I put 4 teams in the solidly NCAA tournament teams category. And I'll work down the list in order of how I view them for this upcoming year. I would have Wisconsin 4th, the closest to the very top tier. I'm buying Greg Gard in general at this point. I mean, when he has a first team all conference caliber player, he's been in the mix. I mean, he has been a top 4 team repeatedly in the last few years when he's had a Johnny Davis or a John Tonji. Now, even look at AJ Storr and how horrible he looked at Kansas. He was awesome in his 1 year at Wisconsin. So I think there's a very safe argument here that Greg Gard will optimize the guys he's got. John Blackwell is a huge breakout candidate for me. I will not be surprised whatsoever if he's a top 5 player in the league. Nolan Winter in the front court, I think, has been waiting for his opportunity and has all the talent in the world. And, Nick Boyd, a former one of the guys from the Florida Atlantic teams that had some really good seasons, I think is a player I really believe will establish a high floor for this group. So, Wisconsin, I really flirted with putting them in the national contenders tier, but I ended up putting them in tier 2 just because I think they're a little bit less talented than the best of the best in this league. From there on, I went with Oregon, Michigan State, and Illinois. 3 teams that I think are all very big in variation. I think Oregon's upside with their star power, they could make a Final Four in March. I wouldn't bet on it, but to me, if that happens, they probably finish in the league 4th, 5th, or 6th, and then surprise people and make like a 6-seed magical run where Shellstad makes clutch shots. Michigan State, it feels weird not putting them in the top tier given what Tom Izzo is, but I hated their offseason. I hated this offseason for the Spartans. I think Trey Holloman was a huge loss that everyone shrugged aside, and he was their culture guy. He should be the captain on this team. He's gone for a paycheck, and I think that's a rather large hit to the entire Tom Izzo operation. I think Trey Fort is the guy they're going to expect to replace Jace Richardson's shot making. To me, Trey Fort is a buckyball product from the Samford system. And if you go through the history of guys that looked great at Samford and then tried to go up a level to Power 5 basketball, it's not pretty. So, you're leaning on Jeremy Fears and Cohen Carr to carry water there. Respectfully, if those guys are 4th and 5th on your team, I think you can win the league. If they're 1st and 2nd on your team, I don't think your offense is going to be very good. So to me, it's almost a bump up for Izzo respect-wise to have them here. Other people won't like that, but to me, if it was coached by anyone else, this roster would probably be in my bubble category. And then lastly, Illinois. This is the one team I'm lower on than consensus, I would say. Another one for me where I think they're overcorrecting a little bit to the youth experiment last year, where Yakashonis and Riley, I think, are taking a lot of the blame for the inconsistencies that team had, when in reality, that team could not shoot. That team did not defend at a very high level at times. And those were issues that guys like Kylan Boswell and Benham Rickhouse were responsible for. Now they're back, expected to be in big roles, and you bring in some 22-year-old Serbians instead of the 19-year-old lottery pick Serbians. I'm not super into a team that is going to be centered around Tom Avicic as the go-to guy. I think Merez Johnson was a huge cultural loss for them, the way Holloman was for Michigan State. And for me, it's a sign of respect to Brad Underwood and Tom Izzo to have them firmly in this tier as is. But I don't see a world where those teams compete for the Big Ten crown.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on Michigan State. If you just look at the roster of the 7 teams that kind of had in these top 2 tiers, I think they clearly have the worst roster of the 7. I don't, I understand the idea behind Izzo not wanting to go portal heavy, but at some point you have to embrace kind of what the system is at this point, and I don't think he's fully done that. I agree. I didn't like the offseason that they had, and while I do think Fears and Carr and Kohler could be a solid trio to build around, I don't see a star in that group. So I think the best case scenario is they're a solid NCAA tournament team, but I also do think they could have their fair share of struggles and then potentially be a bubble team. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Illinois, I don't know what to make because I don't know any of the players other than watching scouting video of 2 or 3 minutes that they brought in to know enough about how those guys are going to translate. They kind of obviously had a ton of talent last year, and at one point in the season, I looked at them and thought, this could be a team that makes a really deep run, and then they get destroyed by what was it, Duke, in that non-conference game late in the season. It's like they're just kind of all over the place. They didn't defend well enough. I don't know that those issues are going to be fixed at all. So I agree with you on all of those teams. So I'm guessing your top 3, just by process of elimination here, we've got Michigan, Purdue, and UCLA in that tier. Yeah,
correct.
You must love what UCLA did in the offseason.
I do. I really do. I think I am probably one of the highest on UCLA Big Ten fans, or whatever you want to call me, that I've seen. So I really think it depends on how you view last season for UCLA, what you believe their upside is this season. I thought they were pretty awesome last year, and that is not the consensus here. And I get it, but finished 20th in KenPom, 23-11. The disaster stretch for that team was a 4-game losing streak that included 3 trips East Coast, where they went to Nebraska, Maryland, and Rutgers, all in the same 10-day span in which the Los Angeles wildfires broke out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you can hold that against them. And I understand that Mick Cronin is kind of this curmudgeon guy that's easy to hate. I'm certainly not a Mick Cronin guy either. And he said some crazy things as they went through that span. But I mean, before that tragedy occurred, this was a team that got a win against Arizona, a win against Gonzaga in the non-conference, and went on an 8-game win streak in Big Ten play after they kind of got their feet underneath them again. So to me, I did not like their roster last year, largely because I hated their guards. I just never wanted to believe in Dylan Andrews and Sebastian Mack as a duo. To me, they have maybe the most clean, we fixed this problem spot in the entire country. Donovan Dent is one of the best point guards in the nation. He's electric. He's a guy who can carry a team to wins. And there are some stylistic questions on how it's going to mesh with, the way Mick Cronin wants to play. But I just think that Mick Cronin is a guy who has built teams around offensive engine types. You think back to the Jaime Jaquez years, Johnny Juzang years even. He's going to be able to win games with how good of a defensive coach he is when you have an offensive superstar like Dent. I know there are some people who believe the front court still has issues, and Tyler Bilodeau is certainly not a great defender. I don't think Xavier Booker is going to be an impact player on this team at all. That's not part of my pitch on UCLA, but I don't think they need him to be, really, truly. I think they can win games going small with Tyler Bilodeau and Eric Daly manning the 4 and 5. And the upgrade at the guard spot is enough to take them from 20th in the country into really the top 10 in the country for me.
And then your top two, how do you kind of rank these two teams? I mean, I think most people would say Purdue the favorite in the preseason, but I look at Bart Torvik. I think right now he's got Michigan ahead. So is it close between these two, or are you going with Purdue over Michigan?
It's not close for me. Now, just ranking upside, I think you can argue Michigan's upside is top 5 in the country. Good. But I also think Michigan is the most volatile team out of the entire top 7 here. And as a Michigan fan, I say that, but I'm perfectly comfortable saying it. Yaxel Lendeborg's amazing. I think him in the Danny Wolf role, again, kind of like Dent at UCLA, I think it's one of those things that is just a perfect fit and a huge, honestly, upgrade, as crazy as that sounds. Danny, at times, I think they had to play through him more than they wanted to because of the limitations they had at point guard. I don't think there's going to be many moments this year where you're feeling forced to get the ball to Yaxel Lendeborg and letting him inflict pain on an opponent. I am not an Adai Mara believer. I am not an Elliot Cadeau believer. And if you want to buy the Michigan upside pitch, you have to buy both of those guys, not one of those guys. I understand the reasons to believe in them. I think Mara's in a system defensively that will work with the things he does well and hide the things he does poorly. I think you could argue the same with Cadeau. Dusty May's a great guards coach and a very fun system to play in. But at the same time, Cadeau's turnover issues are not going to be helped by the freedom that a Dusty May offense brings. And they really don't have much of an insurance plan. To me, the thing you can nitpick about Michigan is that if Cadeau does not take a leap, you don't have an alternative. They really don't have a backup point guard they're going to turn to other than getting creative and having Yaxel be this jumbo power point forward. So for me, there are people who believe in Cadeau. If you believe in Cadeau, you should have Michigan very close to Purdue. I'm not one of those people. I just really was disgusted by his development in North Carolina and the brand of basketball he plays, to be honest with you. So they're so deep. I mean, Trey McKinney's a stud who would start on most of these teams. He's Michigan's 8th or 9th guy coming into the season. And I think Dusty May has a pretty high floor with how he's coaching right now. So to me, comfortable too for Michigan. Purdue is just Purdue. And if I want to play skeptical devil's advocate to this team, I would point out that it was their defense, their rebounding, their lack of rim protection last year that had this team in a spot to finish tied for 5th in the league with no banners and no deep March run. And as good as some of the additions they've made are, they didn't address the biggest problems from last year's season. Omer Meyer and Oscar Cluffer are not going to fix this team defensively. And if those are the best 5 in between Fletcher Lawyer, Braden Smith, and Trey Kaufman-Renn, I think we'll basically just see a souped up version of what last year's team was. So, that team was between 15 and 20th nationally. I expect this team to be one of the best 2 or 3 teams in the country. That's my expectation for Purdue. But I think it's going to be largely because they have the best offense in the sport, and smart teams that are well built to exploit some of those weaknesses, I think will still be able to get to Purdue. But yeah, to me, they're in a tier of their own as the only favorite in this league.
Last thing before we get you out of here is this a year that you could see the national championship drought ending for the Big Ten? I feel like we have this conversation every year. It's been since 2000, which is crazy to think about. I mean, the longer this goes on, it's like, I know there's a lot of luck and chance in terms of the NCAA tournament, but at some point you feel like the Big Ten's going to have to break through, right?
You would think at some point for sure. I think if you're playing that game, it has to be Purdue that you're banking on. I really would be stunned if anyone outside of Matt Painter's group does this. I will say, if we're going through the last 20 years and trying to pick out individual teams or spots where we're like, that was our best chance as a league, this is a pretty good one, because the top of the sport to me is a little more wide open than it's been. Oddly enough, I think the transfer portal NIL era has it hasn't created parity to the mid-major level, but it has created some parity within the elite teams because everybody's spending money now. It's not just 3 or 4 schools that are. So I think, they're the favorite on paper. The Final Four is in the home state. And in a lot of ways, when you have a National Player of the Year candidate, another All-American with him, 3 guys that started in a national championship game 2 years ago, it's fair to say this should be the year. It's probably going to be Matt Painter's best shot at it. There are reasons you can pick holes in it as well. But right now, they're my national title pick, Alex, as much as that probably pains your Indiana listeners to hear.
Hey, you know what? The Big Ten's got to get a championship at some point. So Indiana fans will hope it's somebody else, but I agree with you. In the preseason, if you're going to pick a Big Ten team, it's got to be Purdue. Greg, thank you as always for being gracious with your time coming on the show. Brought a ton of, we went through 18 Big Ten teams in just a little bit over a half hour. So that's a quick way to do it. I really appreciate the time. And for those who haven't checked Greg and Carter's workout, check them out on social media, YouTube, Sleepers Media. You guys are putting out stuff every day. You doing any football stuff as well?
We're leaning a little bit into football. We did more last year, but we're still, don't worry, we got our eyes on Cignetti at all times.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody, as always, for listening. Thanks, Greg, for coming on the show. And we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.